Mistpaw Ravine is a cat-based cozy city builder that releases today, March 4th, 2026, on the PC, specifically Steam, for the price of $15.99, with a 10% launch discount. It has you semi-take control of cats in creating a working society that keeps them happy, while protecting them against their own filth and random lightning strikes. But before I begin this rambling review, this key was obtained from the developer for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Okay, for the purposes of this review, this is one of the runs that I had towards the middle end of that run. I don't want to necessarily show you everything the game has to offer, but I do want to show you a good chunk of it. This is Cleveland 2. Yes, Cleveland. It's a joke in the house that Vlad always wants to take over Cleveland. Regardless, this is the city that I've built. And I started with, 5 or 6 cats and a little bit of resources and built it up to this. This is about halfway through what would be considered a full run. As you can see in that tech tree that you saw, there are 5 tiers of things to unlock with mana. You have a lot of resources that you have to deal with. As you can see in the top left there, you have wood, you have gloomwood, you have food, you have a lot of things to manage, although compared to something like City Skylines or Sim City, for you ancient people out there, it's a lot more condensed and a lot more cozy in certain ways. So the object of the game is to build, and try to get it so that your city builds its own wonder. And that, I think, completes the game. You'll notice I said I think there because I haven't actually completed it fully. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Now, the way that you go about actually doing that is a little bit different from what other city builders are out there. And it's one of the first things I want to point out because of the way the game plays and how expectation of the genre city builder may be for certain players out there. See, you don't have a huge level of control over individual cat resources. The cats in this game are your workers, and they will do tasks that are needed. For example, they will farm, they will gather wood, they will, work and clean up the locations, the poop that they make. But you don't tell them specifically to do that. How you do that is you build certain buildings and they assign themselves to those buildings and actually do the action in question, or they figure out what action they need to do outside of it. You don't necessarily tell them what to do. So for example, you see that cat that's going to that blue Tetris block down there. He's mining because I made a building that basically says anybody who works here goes and mines. That may sound very similar to, assigning him directly, but there's a difference here, because he could have chosen something else if he thought that was the better option. And the way he makes that choice is based on a couple of factors. First, it's how close he is to that location, what he's doing at that very moment, and in particular, priority. You can assign priority to buildings, especially buildings that are being made right now. And they are level 1, 2, and 3 stars. 3 stars being, do this one first, and 1 star being, okay, it can go to the back of the line. Now, you just saw when I clicked on that one, it was 3 stars. That meant that build that first, or work on this first. So a cat, given the choices, will be like, oh, hey, I'll do that one first. But within those star priorities, it could choose a couple of different options. Let's say you had 4 buildings with level 2. It may choose the building closest to it for the choice of what job to do, or what resources it needs to gather. And so you have some control, but not entire control. And you'll have to play games in terms of maybe pausing buildings. Tell it, yeah, don't work on that building, and that cat may go off and do something else. Now, that's great, but turning on that building again doesn't mean that cat is going to come back. you may have to get a different cat if it assigned itself to an action that keeps them at that building. And once a cat chooses a building, it's pretty stuck there unless you unpause it. Even if you're building a higher priority thing, if it's already assigned, it's doing that action, at least from what I see. Some of the logic when it comes to that course of action is a little bit obscure, but I also think that's part of the interesting element of this game. Again, cats, well, at least cats that I've experienced in real life, don't necessarily listen to what you're telling them. And this sort of captures it in an interesting way, at least in my opinion. Why I make a note of this is that it's going to be an experience for you to adjust yourself to that mechanic, because recovering from certain elements may not be as easy as you think. So, one of the first runs that I did, for example, I tried to get as many cats as I could immediately, because I thought more workers equals more power to everything that I needed to do. But the thing is that obviously more cats means more food. And the food, in terms of, as you can see in the middle there, the plants that I'm creating, the food that I'm creating, takes some time. It takes some time for it to come up because it needs to be watered and the cats need to actually work on them. And the thing is, I got too many cats at once, and all of a sudden, I was out of food. And the cats were struggling. Their happiness was way down. They were basically lazy at that point. And I restarted my run after that. What this ends up creating is a more macro management than micromanagement, because you can't necessarily get a lot of resources right away by trying to individually adjust things like you would in a Sim City or City Skylines or some other game like Warcraft, for example, with, gathering resources. Here, you got to be a little bit more forward thinking for maximum efficiency. Now, the game is more casual. The fact is that you're not going to run into a situation where your cats are overly screwed, but it may take a little bit to get out of a hole, and sometimes you just build something and you just don't like it anymore, and, well, you're like, okay, I'll just start a new run, especially when you're actually, reviewing the game. However, those who love micromanagement are going to hate this because, yeah, you can really micromanage and pause and keep on pausing, resources. You can manipulate the time. As you can see in the bottom left there, I can pause the game, go in regular speed, 2x speed, 3x speed, so that, okay, maybe I need another resource. I focus on that and just fast forward like I'm doing right now. But you'll feel a little out of control in terms of that because, again, something may happen that you can't necessarily react to right away. In particular, for example, there'll be a cat that comes along that doesn't like you, a rival cat per se, and he'll just throw a lightning bolt at you and stun a bunch of your cats. And the thing is that you can technically move your cats around and move the buildings around so that they don't all get stunned in one lightning bolt, but you don't find that out until much later on, and by that time, you've already sort of fallen in love with your city, per se. You've already made all these roads and all these elements, and you don't necessarily want to move it, and then you're just sort of stuck with it. Now, for the next runs, maybe you learn that, but you can see where the trouble there is. You didn't really have a hint of what's going on there, and there are going to be situations where you just feel like the game could be doing more in terms of giving you options. In particular, one of my biggest concerns about the game, because I did enjoy my time with the game. I did like making my cities. I did like making all these roads. The first ones that I made, they were just wherever I could put resources. But here, obviously, I put roads down. The roads aren't necessary for them to, go about, but I wanted to make it like a city. Though my concern comes with the variation from on the run, because obviously there's going to be replayability here, at least for people who are expecting city builders. They're going to want to build a city one way, and then a city a different way, make their perfect city. The problem is that the difference from the run to run isn't necessarily that big. You do have some options at the start to move some dials in terms of like how many cats you start with, how many resources, how often certain things happen. But the base level game is very consistent when it comes to what it gives you. And based on my experience, what it starts with is you start with your sort of middle portion and you work your way outward. As you go outward, if you think of it as a circle from the middle, that amount of resources as you move that circle outward will always be consistent. Maybe in one run, the wood spawns more in the northwest, while in another run, it spawns in the east and south. But it's always the same amount. You're not going to get a lot more trees in the, like, first, like, let's say, segment of that circle as opposed to the second segment of the circle. And that does mean that your strategy can stay consistent. Now, there's one thing I do need to address with that. As you can see, there is sort of a fog of war in terms of this game, that sort of black outline. And this is the later game where that black can start to take space back, but I'm talking about the regular fog of war. That is a resource for you to collect. It's mist, and you will assign cats to mist gatherers to unlock more of the map. Again, you don't necessarily have control of where they go, but if you put a mist collector in the north, they're going to go to the closest thing. Also, the sound will go out at certain points here. I kept an alt-tabbing. Sometimes the sound came back, sometimes it didn't. I apologize. The thing is, the game's resources sort of structure it that you have a certain way that you upgrade. So, for example, there are buildings that need crystals, and crystals are one of the mid-level resources that you will get. The thing is, unlike, let's say, the wood, you can plant trees there, and that's something you can get relatively early on. So you're not necessarily just finding random trees on the map and only finding those trees on the map. You can make your own wood. For the crystals, you do get that option eventually, but unfortunately, it's a lot later on. I think it's in tier, either the last tier or tier 3 or tier 4. And that means the buildings that need crystals and you don't necessarily have the crystals on hand in order to do it, well, then you're just having to, like, randomly search around the map or have more cats look for things. And that can get annoying when it's just not giving it to you, especially when you get a new upgrade and you just don't have the resources to do it. It can feel like the game is sort of screwing you at that moment, and that's the downside of the sort of, I don't want to say idle city builder, because there are going to be times where you just let the game go, like you can see here. I'm not doing anything, but I'm letting the cats do what they need to do and gather resources. I don't need to do anything specific right now. But I can't necessarily force the issue as well. And unfortunately, that's where I'm struggling with this game, because it's obviously more cozy. It's obviously focusing on the vibes of being a laid-back cat. But in that same breath, I would expect more from the decoration element or the ability to make your own city its own thing more than what's available here. So, as you can see, I do have things like that. There's that one house with the actual roof. That's something I found, and I can't build that house particular, but it's a little bit special. I built the scratching post above it. I can make more scratching posts, and I can make little plants and things here, but I also wished I could color it. I can set cats to certain colors, but only a subset of colors. So if I wanted to say all cats that I would expect to be doing woodworking to be the purple, that may work for a certain element, and I may have to change it if they decide to assign themselves to different places, but there'll be a certain point where you don't have the option. You literally don't have enough colors to all the different jobs available. And honestly, part of the charm here is the presentation. I love the houses being little cat homes. I don't know what they're called. They're just the little circles there. And I like the fact that the bigger home is literally one of those, like, vertical houses. Like, you know, you see them climb up and down them, and it's just a little variant of that. I love that. I love the fact that the trees are very simple, but they're obviously trees. Granted, if you look at the ones up there, they almost look like weird ice cream cones, but I can tell they're trees. I can tell everything at a very easy glance of what it looks like, and the colors here that were chosen are naturally cozy. They make me feel calm. They make me feel peace, and when things get a little bit more divisive, they get a little bit darker. As you can see in the top right there, the ink and the gloomwood, they're a little darker. They're a little bit more like, okay, bold. And that's part of the point, at least from my perspective, is that they're a little bit more, I don't want to say edgy, but a little bit more volatile, I guess is the word I'm looking for. That presentation really does give the game its cozy feeling. I love the fact that the cats, when they are flying around on their brooms, they're just sort of vibing on the brooms. Like, when a cat is moving along, it's just sort of bouncing up and down. It's not necessarily doing a little run or anything. I like the sound design is crisp and clear. A click, you get an indicator. You know, when you pause, it's a literal, like, click of what you would hear on, like, a light switch. It makes sense. It gives you the feedback that it needs. And everything works in terms of the UI to a certain extent. Would I wish that certain key binds were available for certain elements? Yes. You can bind things like the speeds to like 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, that's great. But like, if I wanted to build a house, I wish I could just press H. And granted, there's a lot more buildings than keys on the keyboard per se, or at least the basic QWERTY keys, but that would have been nice. The UI itself, I do like this UI. Everything is clean, at least at the bottom of the screen. You can see the happiness clearly, the mana, all the symbols are relatively easy to understand once you know what they mean. I had a little bit of a problem at times understanding that the scroll is where I got the item that allows me to pick up relics, or also poop. So weird combination. And I like the UI indicators on the left there, especially because if you click on it, it would take you to the location like most other games. Granted, there were times where maybe it wasn't necessarily informative. Oh, relics ready to be collected? Oh, wait, I can't collect it because the darkness took it over again. Maybe it shouldn't give me that, or given some indication that it was taken over. But I do have problems with the top left. In particular, and this is going to be a throwback to my last review because it's a mistake I made in the last review, is color on color action. I understand that the person here loves purple, and that purple turnip, it's not a turnip, it's referred to something as different, that works because the dark purple in the back, that purple can be seen against it. The ink and the mist right next to it, not so much. It takes me a moment to look at it and be like, wait, what is that resource again? And with a resource management game, that shouldn't be the case. Even the purple cat heads in the corner, it's a little bit more defined, especially with the eyes, but it is a little bit like, why not make the head color something different just so that it's easier to read? And it's just one of those things that I feel like, especially with this developer and what I've seen from their other games, it's a mistake I didn't expect them to make. They made games like Witch Hand, which is probably my favorite of the games that they've made. It seemed to understand that a lot more compared to this game. Look, I'm 19 minutes into this review, and I've said a bunch of positives and a bunch of negatives. The music, it's good for the type of game it is, but you're going to put a video on in the background because it's just sort of that generic, like, oh, we're all happy and we're all doing things music. It's not going to be something that you're going to listen to over and over again. But, all right, we're getting to the end of this review because, well, after like 20, 22 minutes, people don't click on videos like this in terms of reviews because it's just the city builder. They just want the opinion. But regardless, is Mistpaw Ravine for you? If you want a laid-back city builder and you want a little bit of calm, a little bit of serenity, and you like cats, this is a game that you're definitely going to want to play. It does have the sort of like stress-reducing element that you would want in a game like this. It does have enough options to feel like you are doing something, and especially if you play city builders more casually and like different ways of doing it, I think this game does provide a specific flavor of that genre that people will enjoy because they have to adjust a little bit. However, if you don't like that adjustment, if you really want that level of control, that, you know, micromanagement, make the numbers go up in the way that you want to make the numbers go up, you may not like this. You may not like the fact that you can control the cats or specifically deal with things very quickly. And that's where the score sort of becomes an issue because, well, it's so based on what are my enhancers, then how do I make the base score? And when I think about it, people who like city builders are still going to like this game in a certain way. And I think that is the definition of a niche title. Are the mainstream people going to like it? Not necessarily. It does some cool things, and cat lovers will love it, and others will just be like, eh. So that's why the game gets a 71 out of 100. It's a niche buy, and you may want to make for a sale if you're hurting for cash. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. And as you can see, like I've been, sort of preaching in this review, there are going to be some players who are going to love this, and there are going to be some players who are going to hate this. And that's fine. That's the type of game that you would hope would do well in terms of its demographic. And sure, with the certain additions, I think this game could end up being better than what its current iteration is. But obviously, it has to have a return on investment. So I hope if you do like what you've seen here, give it a shot, because I do think it does do enough to make you interested. And even if you don't like this one, I would also go and maybe look at the developer's other games like Witch Hand, because I think this dev does have talent. Granted, I would like him to have a little bit more resources at his beck and call, but he does have talent. Anyway, that's it for this review. Now, if you like this type of review, and I would love to get the feedback in particular with this format, hit that like button or that dislike button and leave a comment about what you thought about the review below. Obviously, I'm always taking feedback, but in particular with this one, being so sort of stream of consciousness more than my sort of edited clips 10 seconds, 20 seconds here, I would love to hear if you want more reviews like this. The fact is, I'm never going to do an edited review like I would normally with a city builder, because the moment-to-moment gameplay is very important to understand the actual gameplay itself and what is evolving on screen. Jumping around over and over again just gets the people confused in terms of what impression it leaves. Anyway, as to what I will be reviewing next, it could be a game that I'm already playing. I will look at games coming up, but there have been games that have been released that I do maybe want to give my opinions on. Games like Demon Tides, I'll be trying to stream that more over on Twitch. Games like Winnie's Hole, yes, that's a weird title, but it's by the makers of Ring of Pain, and I really like that game, and I'm liking this game as well. Or even games like, well, Slay the Spire, which I'll be playing this week, or Slay the Spire 2. Obviously a bigger title than I normally cover on this channel, but it's Slay the Spire 2. I'm gonna put hours and hours of hours into it. As for what I'm streaming or what I'm looking at next, you can always join the Discord in the description below. Anyway, that's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.